a lot of people on the political right have, in a very cynical, bad faith way, I think, co-opted the language of arguments and logic, and even the phrase logic, facts, and reason, which they use sort of as a mantra. And a lot of people who are on our side sort of respond to that, have learned to respond to that by kind of rolling their eyes and, and being very dismissive, which I think is understandable, but I also think it's a missed opportunity. So what I try to do in the book is both urge people who share my, leftist and socialist commitments to spend more time showing exactly what's wrong with these right-wing arguments, and also to make more explicit arguments for our positions, for everything from social equality to workers' control of the means of production.
Well, you're a philosophy professor, so in a way you study philosophy, but you also try to teach it to young people going to the university there in Atlanta. Tell me a little bit about why this problem that you tried to address in the book. Why did it arise? What has happened perhaps in the so-called culture wars here in the United States that have made people perhaps distant from or cynical about argument?
Yeah, so I think that part of it, is that over the course of the last few decades of those culture wars, people have sometimes rightly, become suspicious that people arguing for other positions are just being biased by their circumstances. They can't see, the perspective, that other people are coming from. That's not entirely wrong, right? But I also think that there's an element of it which has to do with what I think of as the pathologies of powerlessness, that it's been so long since the left, especially the socialist left, has been anywhere near the levers of real power, especially here, that oftentimes people sort of prefer to sort of signal that their moral commitment to left goals than to really worry that much about persuading people who aren't on board and doing the things that they would have to make our goals attractive to people and to try to actually win, right? So I think that once you take seriously the idea that I think is more on the table now, because of certainly the Bernie Sanders campaign, other things like that, like large numbers of Americans actually are on board with these things, that we could win, then I think you have to really start thinking about, okay, well, how can we persuade? Not everybody can be persuaded, but how can we persuade the people who can be persuaded? And that's what the book tries to do, to try to say, all right, all of these arguments that people make against our positions, if we never get around to showing exactly what's wrong with them, that makes it look to people who might be sitting on the fence as if maybe we just don't have good responses to these. And I don't think we need to do that. I think we have excellent responses, and we should make them.
That's very interesting. I want to draw out one point. Would it be fair to say the following?
Yeah.
Your argument, but in different words.
Sure.
That the American left kind of resigned itself over time to being a marginalized group, and so in upset or anger or resignation or some combination gave up the constant effort to persuade, and that are now thinking that because obviously people are open to it, it's now time to get back to it?
No, I think that's absolutely right. I think that between the long decline of the labor movement, the exile of even the mildest social democrats, from political power, all too often people got used to just thinking of this as a matter of expressing moral commitments, that we're going to hold our protest signs and denounce things, and that's about all we can do. And I think that you start to hear, like, sometimes when people on the left will say things like, oh, it's not my job to explain such and such to you, right? Well, actually, if you want to win, right, if you want to persuade people, if you have like political goals that you take seriously in real life, it's precisely your job to try to explain things to people. And instead of sort of saying, well, if you were a better person, you would already get it, right? Which is often the implication. And I think that's a really unhelpful kind of moralism, and that we should be really using every tool at our disposal to try to persuade the people that can be persuaded and to try to build power.
And you mean it literally. It's everybody's job. It's not. There aren't experts whose job it is to make the arguments. It's necessary for everybody in his or her mind to frame it and phrase it as it makes sense in their lives.
Absolutely, yes.